Louis, Louis, this is bad. This is bad, bad, bad journalism, bad documentation. It's lazy. And this is someone who has a high respect and high regard for the stuff you've made in the past. Louis is a grown ass man. I mean, older than me, but also a grown ass man like myself, trying to dissect the issues that are going on with young men.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a minute of your time to tell you the story of my life.
And instead of going on an in depth, nuanced perspective and insight into the young generation and what is affecting them, this guy decided to make a sensational, controversial, content clickbaity documentary focused so much on the what, the who, but it didn't focus on the why. There was none of the why. And if you're really making a documentary to help save people from this quote unquote manosphere, why did we not focus more on the why? Is it because it doesn't go viral? This was essentially made just to validate all the stereotypes around young men and fearmonger parents. Parents to go to their kids and be like, okay, I've just watched this documentary. Let's sit down and let's talk about who you follow, why you follow them, and etc. etc. in the history of parenting. I'm someone with two boys myself. My boys are quite young. But in the history of parenting, I've been a teenager. When has that ever worked? When has that ever done anything but make those things seem even more appealing to young boys? The people you brought on the platform who I've seen in passing, they were just there to perpetuate stereotypes. And a lot of them didn't even sound like they believed or lived by the stereotypes they were perpetuating. And I guess that's part of the journalism exposing them, but this wasn't an expose piece. This was a piece to help the discourse that's going on or to help a generation. It was weak, like, and I won't talk about the people in the documentary, but I will talk about someone whose content has been positioned as the key factor of the manosphere. I want to talk about Tate because when Tate started getting really big and he was everywhere, and I was like, who is this guy? What is this? It sounds like he's just. I came up in a world where he didn't platform corny people. So I was proper like, it sounds like all these guys are corny. So I sat down and I watched a 3 hour interview with Tate. And I'm not a fan of Tate and I don't agree with everything he says. But what it did allow me to see is I understood why teenage boys gravitate towards him. Because what he was doing and what was only touched on a fraction in this documentary was he was speaking to young men and not at them. He was speaking so much closer to their reality and not to the romanticized version of what the world is. And that connects with young men. A lot of people are telling young men, if you go around the world and you be nice to people and and you help them out and you're considerate, you'll be rewarded for that. And even as adults, we know that's not the reality. We've gone and the young men go out and this doesn't happen for them and they become angry and then they look for other voices. I grew up in Wood Green, pretty rough neighborhood by London standards. And I know the feeling of sitting at the back of the bus and being scared that some older boys from another school are going to see your uniform, jump on the bus and stick it on you for your phone or stick it on you just because they got nothing better to do in their dickheads. And you know what's interesting? What did I gravitate towards back then? Gangster rap. Because although not everything they were saying was positive, they gave me a feeling of empowerment. They were like, yo, you can fight back. But they've given these young boys a sense of empowerment that they're in control of their reality and of their world. Is that not going to gravitate towards them versus you lot saying to them, listen, this is what a young man should be vulnerable, express your emotions. Yeah, that's great for an adult. But for a young man who's still learning to manage those emotions, you need to understand and acknowledge the spectrum that they go through. And this is another thing, what I hate so much as well, especially when it comes to relationships and how young men are being taught to handle them, is we are taking the intellectual capacity and the maturity of adults and imposing that on young boys and saying, young boys, mothers are teaching their young boy that this is how you should treat a woman. And I'm not saying those are not the way you should treat a woman, but you have to understand that in context. Because what was disgusting in actually watching the Manosphere documentary was watching young women being enamored by these guys who were degrading and dehumanizing them. And that's a massive thing in culture. So when a young boy goes outside and you haven't given that context and he sees, oh, these guys are treating these women like shit and they love them, what do you think is going to turn in their head? What wheels do you think are going to turn in their head? And this is what happens when they now get an influencer or someone who's a multi-millionaire saying to them, yo, treat women like this and they'll love you. Treat women like that and they'll respect you. Don't respect women because they don't deserve respect. Treat them less. They don't know what they're thinking about. That's going to resonate with them more so than what you're telling them, because he's speaking at the reality that they live in. What really frustrated is me, I felt like Louis didn't speak to any of the people that are actually impacted by the Manosphere. He didn't speak to any teenagers. He didn't ask their opinions. We have to give them context. There's a big thing, male suicide rate, male depression. Do you think because these people have no one to talk to? Because everybody's talking at them, not to them. They're telling them the emotions they feel are wrong. The spectrum of how they process things shouldn't be right. It's like I have kids in school, young boys in school, and I'll give you context. I've done workshops in mixed schools, I've done workshop in boys' schools, and I've done workshop in all-girls schools. And I tell these parents all the time, when I'm in the all-girls school, it's like I'm in bliss. When I'm in the boys' school, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't deal with this, etc., etc. But as a mature person, I acknowledge that these people are processing reality differently. Their experiences are different. And I can't impose what I impose here over there. And that is not wrong. That is not wrong. We want equality, but doesn't mean all equality has to look the same. That's not a bad thing. And that's what this documentary, I feel like, didn't touch on none of this. There's an interesting part where they talk to this young guy whose whose brother committed suicide. The guy was like, I don't believe in depression, but my brother committed suicide. Ridiculous sentiment. But he articulated the fact that he didn't have a father. And he said he was lonely and he had no one to talk to and he felt like his life was over. And these figures spoke to him and they gave him a sense of empowerment. They gave him a sense of control. And this is what nobody talks about. We touched on how important it is to have males in the household, but that was only a fraction of the documentary. We need more positive role models being platformed. I think it's tragic that we live in a society, I'm speaking to my experience, where a lot of women are being forced to raise men by themselves. You need to step up. These young boys need fathers in their homes. They need positive role models. You can't sit back and be like, oh, these kids are doing this and that and all that kind of stuff and not take an active role in your children's life. I say this from a place where I grew up, that young boys were joining gangs and they were getting killed as young as 17, 18, and this was normalized because there was not strong men in society. It's interesting, I was talking to my wife and she was saying she addressed the point that women are just trying to raise these young men to be great husbands or to be great partners. And I think that's honorable. But what you need to understand is that nobody is perfect. The partner you have is probably not perfect. And you are probably not perfect as a partner. And only focusing on how they can be better service to another person does them a disservice as to how they can be better as an individual. Standing up against this stuff. And when strong men are not standing up, strong men are not being platformed, we end up with this circus show of what becomes a Netflix documentary that's telling us this is what we should focus on. Why was none of that discussed? Because you're making it seem like these kids are just delusional and that we should just tell kids what to do, and if we tell them to stay away from this, it's going to work. That's like, don't listen to rock and roll music because you're going to do drugs. I mean, you might do drugs, but ultimately it's like, that's not a gateway to a conversation. Don't listen to hip-hop music because you're going to be like this. We've all been there. So we have to have the same approach or the same kind of understanding for young men instead of this condescending reality that these documentaries and films are portraying. One of the things that I feel like is not touched on as well is we don't touch about the overarching themes that are creating these communities. It's disgusting that there's a 23-year-old running an agency where he pimps out young girls. And you know what's even more disgusting is that there's an infrastructure, a platform that allows that to be possible. Like, we live in an extremely hypersexualized society. The hypersexualization of society to the point where it's normalized for young boys to be chasing young girls and just sleep around with them with no level of modesty, no level of self-respect for their sexual morality. I just felt like the documentary took the stance of saying that everybody who votes for the Reform Party is a racist, unintellectual, without looking at the situations or the governmental policies that have led them to those votes. I don't vote for the Reform Party, by the way. It's kind of like when people tell everyone, oh, beware of these Islamic radicalists, and now they're afraid to eat meat that's halal, or they think if their kids eat halal meat, they'll become a terrorist. I didn't enjoy the documentary. Not only was it like brain rot watching it and listen to some of these guys speak, and then listen to them contradict themselves, and then make arguments that don't make sense, only to ultimately say, listen, I'm just trying to make money and this is a big grift. It made me feel like it did what we are trying to promote more and more in media, is the narrative of demonizing young men and talking at them instead of talking to them.